My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Shakespeare and Cleopatra Video 29, Cleopatra's Parallel Lives. So this is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own. Cleopatra is dead, hovering between life and the afterlife. By some strange process, she becomes aware that a playwright is telling her story. Who is this Shakespeare? What does he know about her? What kind of Cleopatra does he intend to create? He seems to be unaware of her presence, but perhaps if she talks to him as he writes, she can exercise some control over the story of a life that she fears is no longer her own. Well, the book he's writing, the play he's writing as Cleopatra, who's in the room with him and talking to him, is this one, Antony and Cleopatra. But she doesn't know that. She realizes that terrible plays could be written about her. It would make her a buffoon, a clown, and so on. And she's worried about that. So she doesn't know anything about William Shakespeare, doesn't know what kind of plays he writes, doesn't know what her legacy will be now that it's in the control of someone other than herself. Now, there are 7 image arcs of what I call the story tower minor cycle of imagery embedded in every second chapter of thought in the mind of the main character, Cleopatra. I make up my own technical terms. It meant something to me at the time, story tower. But you'll see what I mean as I read. Each of these stories has 4 segments. So in 7 chapters of her 16 chapters of thought, Cleopatra thinks of a story. Each of these stories takes 4 segments to tell. These stories either parallel or contrast with her own story. So as you're living your story, maybe you go to a movie and it might tell you something about your own life. It might be parallel to your life, it might be in contrast to your life, or it might have some parallels and some contrast. We go to movies for entertainment, we read books for entertainment, but we also think about ourselves as we see other people's lives on the screen or on the page. So here are other stories that Cleopatra thinks about in parallel and contrast to her own. Chapter 3, The Royal Prince, page 18. A story in the mind of Cleopatra. The royal prince would play on the grounds of the castle. He would pay no attention to the distant sound. His nurse would stop and listening, wondering whether the sound was coming nearer. The boy would seize the moment and thrust with his sword. So the boy and his nurse are having a play fight, a sword fight. She's paying attention to the sound and he's not. The royal prince would play in the courtyard of the castle on the grassy knoll where the gibbet was on permanent display. The gibbet, the hanging device. As he played, there came the sound of distant fighting. He would laugh when the nurse would drop the ball. She's paying a lot of attention to this sound, and he's not. The royal nurse would meet the guard on the castle stairway. He had stood and watched from the ramparts all the day. He whispered to her that the battle was getting nearer. They had agreed that soon, together, they would steal away. The royal prince would play on the grounds of the royal castle. Every day there came the sound of approaching war. The nurse wanted to take the young prince along with them. The guard thought they would stand a better chance alone. So that story might have parallels and contrasts with Cleopatra. She's thinking that story over with that in mind. Let's go to chapter 5 then, which I just want to find page 34. Okay, this is the story of the royal tax collector. The royal tax collector. The royal tax collector drank more than he should have. He had the weight of the whole kingdom on his mind. His wife tended to her sewing and the children played at knucklebones. Not a soul in this kingdom knows what I go through. The royal tax collector poured another glass of wine. Tomorrow is the day I pay the taxes. I have the bags all tagged in the other room. 8 donkeys should be enough to carry the load. The royal tax collector ignored the wine and rubbed his forehead. I stand between every soul in this kingdom and the king. Not enough, the king keeps saying when I make the monthly trek. Too much, the citizens say, when I return. And the fourth and last segment of that story, the wine grew sour in the goblet of the royal tax collector. Is it sour, or does it only seem that way? Soon I'll be wealthy enough to quit this sorry business. I wonder if the king will ever consent to let me retire. Okay, there's that story, which might have parallels and contrasts with the life of Cleopatra, the life that she's living as she's thinking these stories. This is the royal messenger, starting on page 50. The royal messenger walked through the busy market. His feet were dusty and his throat had swollen his thirst, let me read that again. His feet were dusty and his thirst had swollen his tongue. Oh, for a jug of icy water such as he's had at the last oasis. The oasis had been fed by a mountain stream. The royal messenger savored the water in the bucket. A penny was reasonable enough to quench his thirst. I've gone home heavily laden with opulent riches. I've been the chief guest at many a succulent feast. I've languished in chains and foul-smelling dungeons. I've been beaten with rods, and my back has been flayed. I've been given 3 broken teeth to show my master. I still limp from the painful bite of the ankle screw. The royal messenger practiced the message that he had been given. He placed the wooden bucket back on the ledge of the well. He enunciated well despite the jagged broken teeth. The king, my master, says to say that the king says no. So here's a person who's going to have to give a message which is not going to be cheerfully received. And that might have parallels and contrasts with Cleopatra, she thinks to herself. Let's go on with the Royal Exchequer, which starts on page 70. Another story in the mind of Cleopatra. The Royal Exchequer was on an assignment. He was charged with raising a lot of money for the king. Every soldier in this kingdom has to be paid for, every spear and every sword and every shield. Pick a fight with a neighboring kingdom. Find an excuse to start a war. We are in need of a realm to plunder and to pillage. I still owe for this robe and this crown. Okay, then the third segment of this story is the king's brother ruled to the west, the king's sister ruled to the east, the king's father ruled to the north, the king's mother ruled to the south. So pick a fight with a neighboring kingdom, right? The king was in the throne room, dining, dancing, and drinking wine. The royal exchequer was in the counting house. I want an answer or your neck when comes the dawn. So, a seemingly impossible task, which might or might not have parallels with Cleopatra. Let's go to chapter 11, the royal food taster this time. The royal food taster shuddered as he gazed at the golden plate. He was far from enamored with his royal role. Some envied his place in the life of the kingdom, and some assumed that his service would not be for long. The royal food taster's palate was his own. He did not share the king's choice of cuisine. The king would sit in his throne and stare as if at the food taster's face. He watched him swallow every morsel on a royal plate. Sometimes the food taster's gorge would rise. Sometimes his stomach would surge and boil. The king would look at the food taster closely. He'd watch as long as he assumed it would take a man to die. The food taster's stomach would roil and rumble and churn. Behind his pupils there would rage a searing flame. But he always managed to grin from ear to ear. He was always relieved to finally see a reciprocal smile. So if he ate the king's food and the king smiled back, he was done for the day. He'd done his job. Chapter 13, The Royal Executioner. The royal executioner was very conscientious when he sharpened his axe. He always spent many an hour at the emery wheel. But lately he'd been spending extra time on the blade. I want the quickest, cleanest cut that I can achieve. Make it extra sharp this time, the king had taken to saying. It would seem that there's a traitor in our midst. I feel the knife of a trusted friend in the small of my back. Make it as clean, as quick, as if the neck were your own. There is a debt that is owed to friendship. Pleasant memories must be allowed to have their sway. I want the sentence to be a surprise to the traitor. I want the neck to barely feel the touch of the blade. He never admonished me over the loss of that lady and her daughter, never blamed me when the two of them escaped. Not your fault, the king had said. It could have happened to anyone. But since that time, he's had a different look in his eye. Okay, so lastly, the royal weaver. This is chapter 15, page 120. So these are all stories in Cleopatra's mind. In what way is she parallel to these people? In what way is she opposite to these people? The royal weaver wove all the cloth in the palace. She even wove the fabric of the throne. She had a message which she wove into every endeavor. The message was a secret for her alone. But the royal weaver didn't weave her message in words, not words so plain that a human could understand. Her message was a pattern of seemingly random letters of the alphabet, a message only visible, she thought, to the gods. There were many events in the royal palace. Retainers were allowed to stand in an alcove and watch. The oblivious dancers whirled past the message that she had woven. The royal weaver felt that she alone had the eyes of the gods. The royal weaver had unlimited faith in the gods. She believed that the gods were perceptually acute. Her eyes would join the random letters at royal functions. Surely the message was one that the gods would understand. So here's a note about these stories. I called them parallel lives. Well, parallel and contrasting lives is a better title, but a longer one. I've been a little reckless in making notes for these video readings, so I want to reclaim some of the complexity of the presentation of the imagery of this novel by making a disclaimer. So 2 points here. Number one, I often say when I read and then talk about one of the image arcs in this novel that Cleopatra is telling this or that story to Shakespeare, the person who's writing a play about her. However, number two, in actuality, the text of my novel does not say what Cleopatra does or does not say out loud to Shakespeare. So are these stories kept to herself or are they spoken to Shakespeare? Cleopatra thinks of all kinds of what can be called auxiliary imagery or illustrative imagery or contemplative imagery, what I call by the general title deepening imagery, within the privacy of her own mind. But it's important to remember that she might well have a number of purposes in presenting or not presenting to Shakespeare any of the stories that she thinks about. Now, for herself, she might want to face and understand the truth of her former life, or she might want to believe that her life was more romantic, legendary, and mythical than it actually was. So she might be telling the truth to herself, or she might be lying to herself, in simple terms. For Shakespeare, she might want to present her life to him as in the unvarnished truth, or she might want to present her life to him in only those aspects by which he in his play will present her life as romantic, legendary, and mythical. So she might lie to herself or might tell the truth to herself. She might lie to Shakespeare or tell the truth to Shakespeare. In short, Cleopatra might want to face the truth, or she might want Shakespeare to have access to the truth, or she might not want to face the truth and might not want Shakespeare to know the truth. Any of these 4 Cleopatra motives are possible as the text of a novel is printed. These and other motives might cause her to tell some of these stories, these image arcs, to the writer Shakespeare and withhold others to keep others strictly to herself. So I would like to caution a reader of this novel, despite the fact that I often say bluntly that Cleopatra is telling a particular story to Shakespeare, to remember that nowhere in the text of the novel does it say that a particular story is being told out loud or is not being told by Cleopatra to Shakespeare. Incidentally, I'd also add, as another layer of complexity, that nowhere in the text of a novel does it say that Shakespeare can or cannot hear what Cleopatra says to him, or that he can choose or not choose to listen to what Cleopatra says to him. Or if he does listen, whether he is choosing to go along with what Cleopatra insists to include in the play, which he's writing about her or not. So please realize that I'm simplifying the novel in order to be able to talk about it without making each video note confusingly complicated, but that the text of the novel is the source of a reader's interpretation of the novel and not the writer's simple comment. So I say simply, she's talking to Shakespeare. Not always. Some's in her mind, some's spoken out loud. Okay, here then is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life Is Not My Own. It's found on Amazon where there's more information. There's also more information on my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com. And also on my website, johnpassfield.ca. There are 2 free books, my planning notebook and my reflective journal, 2 books that I wrote about the writing of this book and about many other things, writing and life in general. So lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.